Whatever you do, don't buy an OLED. It will ruin your life, because if you ever look at an LCD display again, you'll never stop vomiting. Let's talk about it. Before that, this video is brought to you by RGB Swap, a better alternative to eBay that I really think you should take a look at. RGB Swap is a marketplace exclusively for selling and buying computer parts that offers much lower fees than competitors such as eBay, as well as greater protection against scams. Whether you're a buyer or a seller, you're guaranteed to be protected since all orders have to be paid for first, and the funds are held for 48 hours after the buyer receives the item or they leave feedback, ensuring that you never get sold a bad item. Additionally, all disputes are manually reviewed and PayPal is used exclusively for an extra layer of security. I gotta tell you guys, I like this website a lot and I really want it to take off as a better alternative to eBay, so please, if you're interested in buying or selling PC parts online, click the link in the description below and give it a shot. I think you'll really like it. Alright, so during this video, I'm gonna go ahead and explain to you guys why OLED displays are just so good that if you ever make the mistake of picking up one for yourself, well, you're never gonna be able to look back on any LCD displays ever again. In fact, any display technology whatsoever, they are all just so inferior to the OLED display technology that if you ever actually look at one, it's gonna be really hard to go back. So with that being the case, if you guys are actually pretty okay with your monitor that you're using right now or the TV that you're using right now, you might not want to pick up an OLED display because again, it's so good that you're going to look back at your other displays and be so disgusted that you're probably going to be going ahead and trying to sell them off and buy more OLED TVs because they are seriously that good. But of course, these OLED TVs from LG are not cheap, so you're going to end up spending at least $1,000 per display, which is just absolutely outrageous. But I'm telling you guys, once you get a taste, it will never be enough. And before you know it, all of your displays in your entire house are going to be completely changed over to OLED technology, whether it be on your phone. Maybe you have an older phone and you're like, nope, that's not good enough, I need to get an OLED phone now. Whether it be your TV that you watch TV on, you're gonna be like, nope, that's not good enough either. And even your PC monitor, you're gonna be looking at it and you're gonna be so disgusted, I'm telling you, you're gonna go ahead and replace it with an LG OLED TV. And of course, this video is not sponsored in any way, and just to prove it, I am going to actually go ahead and outline a few scenarios in which an OLED display might actually be a really bad idea for you, outside of, it just being super expensive and just ruining all other displays for you. On top of that, if you are a PC user and you're considering maybe moving over from your like ultra-wide LCD display or very nice LCD display over to something like an OLED, there are a few factors that might actually make this not for you, but then we're going to go ahead and talk about just why it's so good. But in any case, the first reason as to why if you are a PC user you might not want to use this display is, well, first, the smallest OLED display you can actually get your hands on right now is 48 inches, and despite the fact that it is a very good gaming display, that's an enormous display to have on your desk. So, finding room for it, well, that might just make it so that it's not really an option for you. The other reason as to why you might not want one of these OLED displays is they just don't quite get as bright as the LCD displays, and unfortunately, they do use this ABL technology or auto brightness limiter. And essentially what this means is that if you go ahead and you take something like a Google Doc and you go from a windowed view of it where it's going to be very bright and you actually go ahead and full screen it, well, what you're going to notice is that when you get a very bright full screen white image on your screen, it's unfortunately going to go ahead and actually limit that brightness. It's going to take the brightness down automatically. And for some of you out there, that might be kind of a deal breaker because it might just be so annoying to you when you're going about your day-to-day work that you just simply don't want to deal with it. So those are basically the only two complaints I have about these displays. I wish they were a little bit smaller and I wish they could hit higher peak brightness and sustain that higher peak brightness. But in terms of the actual overall picture quality of an OLED display, especially if you go ahead and you take a look at LG's latest model, the LG C1 OLED in its 48-inch form factor, well, it's actually such a good gaming display that honestly, I did go ahead and actually move over from a very nice 1000 nit HDR 4K 144 Hz monitor to this LG C1 48-inch OLED. And guys, I'm telling you, my experience has been so good that I can never go back to another LCD. And in fact, I liked it so much that I went ahead and actually bought another LG OLED display. I bought the C10 OLED because it was much cheaper, coming in at around $1,000 versus $1,500 for the C1 of the same model at the time. And I went ahead and I put that in my living room because I was looking at my older, just regular LCD 4K TV, and it just paled in comparison to these OLEDs, and I liked it so much that I again wasted even more money buying another OLED display display that I otherwise wouldn't have done. So there you go. There's another reason as to maybe why you don't want to buy an OLED, because like I mentioned earlier, you might find yourself buying more than one because they are that good. But you might be asking the question, well, what makes an OLED display so much better than an LCD display that you would find on your typical monitor? And honestly, that's a great question. But for starters, the first reason as to why I believe OLED is just so much better in terms of its technology over LCD or any other technology that's on the market is, well, OLED actually has basically a per pixel dimming zone, whereas even on the best LCD displays, those maybe will have like a few thousand dimming zones. And what this means is that you can actually have a very bright, just like in the center on like one single pixel on an OLED display, whereas on an LCD display, it's unfortunately not going to be able to give you that same accuracy, and it's going to have a lot of bloom around it, and so it's going to kind of give you a more washed out picture. Now, another reason as to why OLED displays are just so much better is because the blacks on these TVs can get so black that many people call it infinite contrast or true black. So it just gets way darker than any other display can get out there. In fact, they actually can turn off per pixel, whereas on an LCD display, you can't just turn off individual pixels. It just isn't that easy. So of course, you're going to get just insane levels of contrast. You're going to get super brights on the best OLED displays, not quite as bright as the best LCD displays, but you're going to get that infinite contrast in terms of the black. So you're just going to get a much better HDR picture overall, and the picture just in general is going to look smoother as well, because that, moving on to the next point here, OLED displays actually just look very good in motion, because on top of being able to control how bright a single pixel gets and just having infinite contrast, they also have very quick response time. So that also makes them very good for gaming as well. So here you have a gaming display. It's super good for gaming, has super low input lag on top of the super low response times, and then you're also getting the infinite contrast on the blacks, the super brights on a per pixel level. So when you go ahead and you take something like the C1 48-inch OLED and you compare it to even the best LCD display on the market, you could compare it to something like that new, I think the PG32 UQX from Asus. That thing actually hits, I think it's around 1400 nits of brightness. So while you are going to get a very good HDR display out of that, monitor, it's unfortunately not going to look nearly as good, at least in my opinion, to an OLED display, because you are going to have a very compromised experience when it comes to those blacks, even though it does have the, local dimming zones in the back so that it can try and kind of come close to something like an OLED. It just simply doesn't have that same picture quality. It just isn't going to have the same response times in terms of the like gray to gray response time. So the pixel shifting is going to be much slower. So the image is going to look more blurry. On top of that, it's probably not going to have the same input lag as well. When you take a look at OLED displays, they're super good for gaming because that input lag is so low. It's on par with some of the best, lowest input lag monitors on the market. So it just seems like when you go ahead and you buy an OLED display, you're getting the best of what LCDs have to offer, and at the same time, you're kind of getting the best of what CRTs had to offer back in the day as well. So just considering how quick the response times are on these displays. So when you go ahead and you take a look at your first OLED display, if you've never done it, it might be a good idea. It might be a bad idea because you might end up selling yourself on something that's super expensive. But if you go ahead and you take a look at maybe someone who owns an OLED display, or you go over to a store and you take a look at one and you take a look at content, like if you're watching a movie and all of a sudden, like for an example, when I first saw OLED in action, it really wowed me. What I was looking at is I was actually looking at the 4K HDR Blu-ray of Lord of the Rings, and Gandalf had his like little staff out, and he was in the Mines of Moria, and he was, emitting the light out of his staff, and it zoomed way out, and that light, it was like so piercing, but it was in such a small area, and the contrast between that light and the darks in the tunnel was just so amazing to me. I've never seen anything like it, and it just absolutely blew my mind. And at that moment, I knew to myself, I've got to buy myself a 4K OLED display, and I don't think anything else will ever suffice again. Now, there are some other display technologies coming out in the near future here. I know one for sure is the micro LED, and that is going to be a really good option if you're someone who doesn't want to buy into OLED right now, because again, it's expensive. It doesn't come in small form factors, and you are going to have to deal with the auto brightness limiter. So if you don't want to deal with that and you want to wait, unfortunately, you're going to have to wait a long time, because as impressive as micro LED is, because it looks like it's going to have all the benefits of OLED as well as LCD and none of the drawbacks, but unfortunately, micro LED is a long ways away. So you're going to have to ask yourself, do I want to go ahead and spend a bunch of money on an OLED and have the best viewing experience of my life? Because I promise promise you will? Or do I want to stick with my LCD because it's honestly getting the job done? And that's something that you guys are going to have to ask yourself. That's something you're going to have to figure out on your own, because, you know, it might not be the great idea to go out and buy an OLED, because you might end up like me and you might end up buying several and spending a lot of money. But hey, that's just what I think. Do you think that buying an OLED display is worth it, or is it going to ruin your life? Let me know your guys' thoughts in the comments below, and of course, I'll see you in the next video. If you made it to the end of the video, be sure to drop a like. Every time you do so, AMD and Nvidia get more stock. Also, if you want to see more, click here. You won't be disappointed.